Hello, welcome back. It's Marjorie. We are here to talk about episode 9, Execution. Oh my god, was this a good episode? It completely took my breath away. It was written by Eric Tuchman and directed by Elizabeth Moss, and I am just such a fan of Elizabeth Moss's directing. I love it. She does suspense so incredibly well. I was completely breathless through the last 15 minutes of this episode, and I didn't even realize it till it was over. And I was trying to go on the live, and I'm like, I can't breathe. My world was rocked. It was such a silly episode to try to go live for the first time after because I had zero coherent thoughts. It was just so incredibly well done and left me actually shocked at the end. Like, just genuinely shocked. If you watched my prediction video, I hadn't even really considered Nick or Luke dying. Like, I was like, they're alive in the Testaments, therefore, and didn't consider it again. And so to see how everything played out in this episode was just so incredible. I loved it. Also, with Elizabeth Moss's directing, I've seen it said in various forums and even in comments on this channel. I don't have any problem with the amount of close-ups that Elizabeth Moss employs while she's directing the show. The show has always been about these close-ups of June and Offred because the entire book is this internal monologue that Elizabeth Moss has to express on her face. And she does it better than anybody. So no, I have no problems with it. That's exactly what the show is about. Like, I'm happy that we get the monologues back in voiceover and they coincide so well with these shots of June going through these emotions. And it's the Handmaid's Tale. So watching everything through her perspective, like, not only do I want to be able to know what's going on in her head by seeing her face in these tiny nuanced little details, but on top of that, I want to see her react to things. I don't want to just see the plane blow up. I want to see June's face while the plane is blowing up in the sky. So I just think that's a silly criticism to have of a show that has done this so much. I would say that overall they've pulled back from using it a lot in these later seasons, probably because she's out. I'm excited to go back. Like, this series is almost over, and I'm just very excited to have a completed series to go back and dissect, to see how frequently these close-ups are being used and in what context, and if it was too much at any point. And if it's true that I think they've pulled back on it, and probably because once she gets into Canada, she can voice her thoughts without having to constantly read June's face to figure out what's going on in her mind. But I think they still use them because it's a familiar thing with this character. So I don't know, it'd be something interesting to see, but it never bothers me. I like it. I think it's part of the show. I think the writing was absolutely incredible in this episode. Like, every scene was rich and full of conversations that have been seasons in the making, and it's just really fun to watch. Like, this is the penultimate episode of the season, so it's going to be a big one, and it lived up to that just within the season, but it's also the penultimate of the series, and I think they just collectively as a team knocked this episode out of the park. It was incredible, and I think that's a product of what you get when you have so many people that have been working so closely on the series for so many years. You get this very cohesive and complete episode. And one of my favorite things about a really well done series in its final season is getting all these callbacks to earlier events in the series. And throughout this episode, my brain kept pinging in different ways in different episodes. And the first one was the bridge in the background at the hanging. I knew we had seen it before, and I was trying to figure out where we had seen it. So my first guess was the bridge in season 1, but it wasn't. And so I knew I was going to have to go, like, digging through this series, trying to find where I know I've seen that bridge. But I knew I wanted to go look at Mayday. Mayday is the season finale of season 3. It's episode 13 of season 3. And that's the one where June gets Angel's Flight off. And there was just so much about this episode that felt like this was Angel's Flight 2.0. Devil's Flight is what I'm dubbing it. And so I gave up looking for the bridge after it wasn't in the bridge episode. And I went to Mayday to see what I could get out of that episode because I knew there was going to be a lot there. That's a big June and Lawrence episode. And he really comes through for her to help her get that plan off the way. I knew there was going to be a lot in there to kind of sink my teeth in, but there is a scene between June and Lawrence that is so rich in this episode. And this is the kind of writing that just makes me so happy. So in Mayday, there's actually a ton in that episode. And my point about the bridge is that the bridge is in this episode too. So if you are looking for an episode to watch that goes hand in hand with this episode, go back and watch Mayday from season 3. It's the season finale, and it is perfect. There's so much about execution that plays off of what happened in Mayday in really cool ways. Chronologically through the episode, what you get is a shot of Janine right after she's captured, but before she gets her eye removed, which is really quickly at the Red Center. And it's fun to see Janine full of indignation and full of fire while she's being captured, because we know that Gilead is going to snuff that out of her really quickly. So to see how far she's come now in season 6 and making that decision to stay in Gilead and fight to get Charlotte out, the same way that June can't stop going back to Gilead to get Hannah out. Then in Mayday, you get the Ruthless monologue, and there's so much of this episode that is just June proving that Gilead has taught her to be ruthless. So it's a really great reminder and a really great monologue. Then we see the bridge. And this is a really cool scene because there's a conversation that June and Lydia have in the beginning of Mayday on that bridge that is the same bridge 3 seasons later that June and Lydia are about to get strung up on. And to think that that's what they're seeing is this bridge, and to know that they've had this conversation here was really, really blowing my mind once I figured out that it was absolutely the same bridge, and it's in this pivotal episode full of all these callbacks that we see in execution. So in the scene, it's the beginning of the Mayday episode, and all the handmaids are passing off the bars of soap and various different things that they're picking up at the store to help June prep for this Mayday operation, or the Martha Network operation to prep for Angel's Flight. And Lydia knows that she's up to something, but she can't figure out what it is. So she says, "Come here, let me have a look at you." She starts questioning her, and she says, "I want to make sure you didn't pick up any bad habits while you're at the Lawrence's house." And she tells her how the girls look up to her. And then she says that she doesn't want to see any more of her subversive nonsense. And it's wild to think that 3 seasons later, she's convinced Lydia to get behind her subversive nonsense, and now they've got nooses around their neck. And she specifically tells her not to get her friends in trouble, and now they all have nooses around their necks too. Also in Mayday, you get the scene with June and Kiki. We find out later her name's Rebecca. And June is telling her that she can be whoever she wants to be when she gets to Canada, and she can wear whatever she wants. And that was actually the first thing in execution that made me think of this episode, was when June was telling the handmaids as they're approaching the checkpoint and trying to get them across the border. She's telling them to go live their lives and be whoever they want to be, essentially. And my first thought was Kiki, Rebecca. Throughout Mayday, we're watching June gain this power and like it, which is really interesting with the conversation that she has with Wharton in execution, when he asks her how powerful she feels now, as she's accusing him of being a fraud and only seeking power. But we know that June does like this power, and it's understandable that she would, because we know how powerless she was under this regime. And that's been the most fun thing on the show to watch, is June learn how to gain that power back. And a big part of her learning how to gain that power back and maneuver within the power systems at play was Larry. I will try to call him Lawrence, but Larry is a nickname. It is habit. I don't even think about it when I say it. We only have 2 episodes left in this season, so he might just be Larry for The Handmaid's Tale, and we probably won't talk about him that much on the Testaments. Also in Mayday, we get to see Rita working with the Martha Network and then getting her escape. And in execution, god damn it, Rita came through in such a big way. It was so fun to watch Rita. I am so happy with this episode and Rita, and how incredible she looked, and how cool she looked doing everything, and how good Resistance looks on Rita. God, she was incredible. It's so funny to think I was so worried about her dying. I'm very happy with Rita's scenes. I'm very happy that she got out of there without any fallout from that cake. So I'm assuming she's never going back to New Bethlehem. And then finally in Mayday, there is this absolutely incredible scene with June and Lawrence at the end when they are about to kind of get this plan in motion and yet have also gotten through a lot of obstacles to get this plan to this point. And June says to him that he can come with them and he can get out. And his response is, "I'm not a big fan of flying or children." And I almost died when I saw that. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that's his line after that, because it's so perfectly clear from that point on that Lawrence has no intention of getting out. He makes his statement really clear and he says, "Eleanor would want me to stay and clean up the mess that I made." And we get to finally see in this episode the beautiful, tragic, and bittersweet way in which he had to go down with the ship. And so in this episode, to see that he has to go down with the ship, or in this sense, the plane, and that's the sacrifice that he has to make in order to clean up this mess. And it's juxtaposed with Nick and the decisions that he makes at the end of this episode that get him onto this plane too. So that's it for my initial thoughts. I tried to kind of frame my initial thoughts of this episode because every scene was just so rich and everything was so credible from start to finish. So scene by scene is the way to do this, but I tried to frame my initial thoughts and highlights of this episode against that Mayday episode because there was just so much in it. One of the most disappointing things in this episode was realizing that Naomi might actually still be raising this child by the end of the series, and I've never hated Naomi more than in this episode. She was really irritating to me. I had said when we first started this podcast in season 3 that I thought by the end of this Naomi would have turned resistance, and I was so very wrong about that. Unless you want to consider that she's agreeing to read a book to Charlotte Resistance, but no, that's as far as Naomi's ever come with admitting that there's flaws in Gilead's system, is that girls can't read. That bothers her. Nothing else does. The episode starts out with Taylor Swift's "Look What You Made Me Do" playing over a montage of the handmaids escaping the Red Center after Lydia lets them go. And I absolutely love this song choice. It's one of the few songs on here that I just knew already from the beginning. So if anything, that kind of took me out of it a little bit because I'm not used to being super familiar with most of the songs on the show. And I enjoy just seeing how the vibe of the song fits with the scene and what the lyrics are saying and if that fits with the scene too. And I think that tonally and lyrically, this song is just absolutely perfect. It just made me so happy. The lyrics start out with, "I don't like your twisted game. I don't like your tilted stage. The role you made me play." Then you get a shot of all the handmaids walking in a pack, and you get the shots of Janine and Moira and June. And they all look like they are like a pack of wind-up toys. Like they're just these marching soldiers. And there's something about the expression on their face that made me feel like they were just kind of like zombies, in the sense that they just had this like entirely focused pursuit as they walked. And they're heading to the getaway trucks. And one of the things that I thought was so cool in this final Mayday operation, we're seeing so much imagery that we saw in season 1, but it's being employed in such a different way and giving such a different feeling now in season 6. That's really cool. We already talked in the last episode about the costumes and the robes and how they were used as oppression, and now they're being used as a weapon. Then we have all of these like trucks and vans that we've seen these women being transported through Gilead. There's this like ominous feeling to these vans in general. The van that Offred steps into in the end of the book could be taking her to her death or to escape. Vans and vehicles have always been another symbol of oppression or another symbol of fear. And now it's this place of refuge and safety that they're trying to get to, and it's their escape. And it's the same thing with the Red Center and watching them infiltrate that. First, they were brought in as captives and trained to be sex slaves, and now they're infiltrating it in order to free all the other sex slaves and turn them into Mayday operatives to fight for their own freedom. And they've even flipped Lydia in the process, so it's just crazy to see. And then also the fact that this is an entire Mayday operation when so much of the beginning of the series, Mayday was just kind of a hope and a dream and something that Offred wanted to be a part of but wasn't even sure existed. To now see that she's leading this Mayday operation and going back into Gilead and getting these people out and killing these commanders and being the Mayday that's showing up that she had been waiting for initially. Then you get the lyrics from the song that I don't know if they meant for this to be intentional foreshadowing, but it's so perfect that I can't imagine that they didn't at least think about how perfect it is. The lyrics are, I got smarter, I got harder in the nick of time. And that's it right there, huh? So you hear the sirens start to pursue them, and June tells everybody to run towards the getaway trucks. Then you see Ava give a command that detonates all these explosives behind them. And as they're jumping into the truck, you get one final shot of June closing the door with this really defiant look. And I absolutely love the look on her face. And this is what I mean. Like, I'm not sick of the shot. I want to see June's reaction to these explosives going off and working in the way that they were supposed to work. We're going to see in a few seconds that this plan doesn't work, and we have heard June talk about earlier in the season how these plans don't work. So it was really fun to watch her react to this part of the plan being a success. I like watching her relish in the power of putting this all into place. And that's what I see on her face. Then we cut to Serena running in the middle of the street, and the first shot you get is of her heels. And then it pans up, and the lyrics go, baby, I'll get mine, but you'll all get yours. Then you get the sounds of a woman calling for help, which really alarmed me in that moment, and it alarmed Serena. And then I figured out what was going on. It's a handmaid of Jacob chasing the wife down and killing her in the streets while Serena runs from her marriage, clueless about what is happening here. It was really fun to watch Serena maneuver and politic within her wedding, not knowing what was happening underneath her nose. And now to see her life in such turmoil as she flees her marriage, and she has no idea that she's running straight into a rebellion where handmaids are all killing their wives, and here she is in the middle of the street running in her wives' clothes. I like that we got the answer that the wives do get killed too, although I'm surprised that in the scene with Naomi when she's telling Serena that it's 37 commanders, that she doesn't even mention how many wives were killed. Like, I would think if nothing else, like, that information would be important to Naomi and she would be outraged over that information, but she seems to only be outraged over the commanders, which I get is like a Gilead thing, but I just want to know how many wives were killed as well. My biggest criticism of this episode is just that through this montage here, I really wish we had seen more of the commanders' deaths. With the last episode, we're seeing all the handmaids walk up behind these sleeping commanders. Oh, and I was totally wrong. That's not actually Calhoun either. He was alive, although he didn't make it out of this episode, so I guess it doesn't matter. But we saw all these commanders right before they got killed, and I thought with this episode we'd pick up with them being killed. And there would have been more in this montage of all the bloodshed of these 37 commanders. Because after everything we've seen on this series, I feel like that just would have been so cathartic to watch in all the bloody detail the purge of these commanders. And those scenes against this song would have just been extraordinary. The closest we got was this wife being killed. So I'm happy that instead of seeing a close-up of that murder, we just see a close-up of Serena's face and see her trying to figure out what's going on. Like, I really appreciated watching Serena have to steel herself in the way in which we've seen June have to do so many times over the series. Kind of take in what she's seeing and then just continue on in her pursuit and head to the Lawrences for some refuge, as everything around Serena is just stranger and stranger. But before Serena gets to the Lawrences, we cut back to the getaway truck with the handmaids, and we find out that Phoebe's real name is Ava, and June says it's nice to officially meet you. Then they give an update on the plan of how they're going to pick up the station handmaids and drop off the ones that are continuing to fight before they bring everybody to across the border. And June and Moira and Ava are going to stay and keep fighting. And Moira says that this is only the beginning. And I'm trying to figure out what their plan is after this. So they're going to take Boston. And then what? I feel like Boston's so vulnerable, and once DC commanders get word of this, regardless of the fate of these Boston commanders, I would think DC's just going to go right in and wipe Boston out, no? But we get to see Janine tell June that she's going to stay too. And she says, Charlotte is still here just like Hannah. And you can see that June wants to push back. Like, her instinct is to tell her that she can't stay or she shouldn't stay. But June realizes that she has to let Janine make this choice for herself. And June gives a speech that's very reminiscent of that Kiki Rebecca conversation that she has in Mayday. And she tells the handmaids that are about to escape that she tells them, go live your lives. They don't get to decide who you are anymore. And I very naively thought that this part of the plan was going to work just as they had planned it, and that these women were in fact going to get out. But this is Gilead, and we can't have that many nice things, and these plans never work. I should have known, because I know that June is going to get captured and strung up at some point in this episode, because we've seen it in the trailer, but I still just really stupidly thought they were okay at this point in this truck. Then we cut to Lawrence's house, and he is looking out the window, and we get the familiar sounds of Gilead that we get a lot, especially in season 1, 2, and 3 when June is still in Gilead. We hear dogs barking and sirens, and now we have a new sound added to that familiar mix of bombs going off in the background. And then there's a knock at the door, and you can see that Larry is just a good reminder that courage is really not his strong suit, and his comfort zone is minuscule. And then you get Naomi coming down the stairs, and Larry tells her to go back upstairs and go to sleep. And she goes, I've been sleeping like a dead woman. I thought that was a great line. But Serena shows up, and she has to tell Naomi what's going on. And you can see the hesitation in her face as she tells her that she left Gabriel. And it's easy to see why when Naomi reacts with such indignation. She's like, on your wedding night? But I will give her that. That's kind of valid and shocking. They really have only been married for about 5 seconds. She was barely in her home before she left. So I can understand Naomi's shock. Serena basically ignores Naomi at that point, and she asks Lawrence what's going on, and she tells him that she saw a wife murdered in the streets. And he tells her that it's not safe out there, there's a rebellion. Then we cut to the next scene, and there is a great shot on this cut. So you get Larry's final line in the last scene of there's a rebellion. And then the next shot is of Nick sleeping on his desk. And it's a good reminder that Nick has always been sleeping through the rebellion. I continually thought through this episode that he'd be the last minute help to Mayday and to June and finally make the decision to take Gilead down. And this shot was a warning that that was not going to happen. But Rose wakes him up and she tells him that there's something wrong with the pregnancy. And on the rewatch, I realized how ominous this should have been to me, that Rose and his baby were going to be in distress and that was going to be a rallying call for him to show up and be the man that he was for June and for Holly Nicole in the same way that he needs to be now with Rose and this child, if only because after everything that went down at Jezebel's, he thinks he's lost June for good. And he says it in either the last episode or the episode before when he's talking to Rita, and he says that he was only a good man when June was around. I feel like this could be him trying to be a good man for Rose and to finally ignore the rebellion in June and Mayday and whatever is happening. Like, I'm curious if he knew that she was going to get executed, or if he just found out after the fact that her execution was thwarted. I'm not sure. But he just never seems to react to the fact that June and Mayday and the rebellion are all happening. He does kind of double down on being this good husband and father to this child now, considering the state of his relationship with June. And in order for him to be a good husband to Rose and this baby, he's going to have to get on the plane at the end. And so that's the choice he made. And it's not this like evil maniacal plan as much as him just, again, trying to do the right thing and missing the mark incredibly. We'll get into that in that scene. But here you can really see like the urgency in which he jumps up to get her to the hospital. And every time I watch that, I'm like, oh, he just is this like hopeless lost man that just needs someone to want and need him. And since June no longer does, he'll take Rose. But then we cut back to the handmaids in the truck right before they hit the checkpoint. And there is a pause, and I should have known before this, but it was the pause that made me realize, oh God, they're not safe at all. They're going to get captured here. And sure enough, they do. The Guardians bust in, and it doesn't matter how much I knew they were coming and was expecting them to come. The silence before the smashing in of that back door scared the shit out of me. But they pull all the handmaids out of the van and they line them up outside. And I was really expecting them to identify and pluck June right out of the lineup and slaughter everyone else while she watches. I was expecting it to be just like the Jezebel scene with Janine, except now it's June. And I'm really glad it didn't play out that way, because the horror of her having to watch Moira and Janine get slaughtered in front of her like that would have been devastating. But I do believe that they wouldn't just kill June on the spot, because they're gonna want to make an example out of her. Killing her on the spot doesn't seem like something that they would do, and they didn't. And they didn't kill any of them on the spot because they wanted to make a public execution out of all of them, which totally tracks with how Gilead would play this. They can't identify June. They want her to identify herself. And at first, everyone's silent. And then they say they're just going to start killing them off one by one until she identifies herself. And June steps forward. And we've seen her sacrifice herself for the greater good of her plan in the past. We've seen her stick to the plan and watch people die in the process, but she wasn't going to watch this handmaid get killed just to maintain her cover. And we've seen her make these sacrifices of herself over and over again, and we see it in Mayday when she continues to distract the Guardian while everyone else boards the plane. And then it's not until the end when she finds out that all the handmaids have come back and they won't leave a handmaid behind. But we've seen June do that, and Lawrence has seen her do that too. And I think that's a big source of inspiration for him as he has to make the final decisions he makes at the end of this episode. And they identify her by checking the number on her ear tag, and it's 1185. And I don't think that has any significance that jumps out at me. I also don't think we knew that already, but maybe we did. But I got excited for random new information that has no significance whatsoever. And I really love the I love yous that were exchanged between Moira, Janine, and June as they were pulled off in separate directions. That was really heartbreaking, but it's a good reminder of the solidarity that has grown within these women through their oppression. Then we cut back to the Lawrences, and Naomi is giving Serena the delightful news that 37 commanders have been slaughtered. And we hear Naomi double down on her status. She tells Serena they hate us, they all do. And Serena says, yes, wouldn't you? I'm like, thank you, Serena. She has come a long way. And Naomi responds with the most obnoxious answer. We've given them every opportunity for redemption, every necessity. I guess I was really wrong about Naomi and her being quietly and secretly resistance. No, she wants her status. And then we get the exact opposite of the best friend talk that we saw with June and Moira, when June is devastated over her relationship with Nick and what went down with the Jezebel Mayday plan. And she says to her, that line about how she forgot who he was. And Moira is just full of grace and understanding and love for June in that scene. And here Naomi is really giving Serena the exact opposite. She's delivering some really serious tough love here. I understand that it might be coming from a good place where she wants to protect Serena. It's certainly coming from a perspective in which Naomi has of this is how you stay safe in this world. She tells her, enough of your liberal nonsense. She says, enough of your liberal nonsense. You need to reconcile with your husband. And she tells her that she called him and he's here. And Wharton walks in and he is full of apologies. And it's really more of that classic manipulative behavior that we've seen from him. He knows exactly what to say in order to win Serena back and to ease her fears. But he tells her that he wants her and Noah in a secure location, and she really smartly refuses. It's one of the rare times that we've seen Serena make a good choice for herself. She often doubles down on the wrong choice for herself and her safety, but I loved her response when she says, I'm not going deeper into Gilead. I don't know what's going to happen to these wives in this safe location, but they're all widows now, and that very much could have been a choice that saves her life. Although, if she had gone to that secure location, those commanders would have still been alive because she wouldn't have been taken into custody by Tuello. She smartly refuses in order to save this Mayday operation, and maybe herself as well. And through the scene, I could not stop looking at this statue that is sitting in the window between Serena and Wharton as they have this conversation. It does kind of look like it could be a female warrior running into battle or something like that, like an ode to all of the women that take up the fight in this episode. But it brings another image to my mind every single time I see it, and I doubt that it's intentional, but it looks to me more like the statue is raising her hand, like she has something in her hand that she wants to share, or she's raising her hand because she has something she'd like to say. And it reminds me of the conversation that June and Serena have in season 3 when they're remembering baby Holly Nicole. She's now in Canada and Serena is grieving the loss of her in Gilead. They remember how she always had her hand up, and June says, I think she gets that from you. And that's the only image I keep seeing every time I see this statue. In this scene, Wharton is going to feed Serena the information that she's going to eventually be able to use to take the plane down. And every time I rewatch the scene, I just see this little statue in the background with a hand up saying, I have information to share. And I just love the foreshadowing of it. Even though I think I'm stretching to make a connection there. It's the imagery that I like the most of that statue, but I couldn't quite tell what it was. I just know that I couldn't take my eyes off of it through the scene. But if it's like more of a female warrior, I did think it could also be a reminder of June's presence through this scene. In the room where Wharton's talking about this rebellion and the fact that Serena refuses to go deeper into Gilead and she's starting to question her trust in Wharton, just like June had warned her about. So part of me thinks this statue just kind of being this ever-present prop in the background does remind me of the way in which June is kind of this ever-present person for both Serena and Wharton as they figure out their next moves. And throughout the rest of this episode, June is kind of pulling the strings in the background to get Serena to give her the information that she needs to take Wharton down. So I don't know. That statue is certainly open for interpretation, but I couldn't stop looking at it. But Wharton tells Serena that the rebellion plan all went down at their wedding and that it was orchestrated by that heretic June Osborne. And Serena looks so hurt when she says, I thought that we were friends. And my instinct tells me that she wasn't as upset about the fact that June was planning this rebellion at her wedding as much as the fact that she lied to Serena about why she was there in Gilead to begin with. But that could be putting a lot of faith in Serena that she hasn't necessarily earned. I just don't think she seemed too torn up about the fact that these commanders were all slaughtered by their handmaids. She seems sympathetic to the plight. But the final shot of the scene is Wharton telling Serena that justice will be served. And they're facing each other with this statue in the background between them. And the statue could represent June and their opposing feelings to her in this moment, or it could be the fact that Wharton just armed Serena with the information that she's going to use to eliminate him, as he says justice will be served. And then he leaves the scene in like a blink of an eye. Like he's standing there and then he says he's got to go and he's gone. And Serena stays put. And the way in which he just disappeared from the shot like that in a blink of an eye really made me think that there was some great foreshadowing there. Then we cut to the next scene where June finally gets to tell Wharton exactly what she thinks about Gilead, and it is such a cathartic scene. But the first imagery of her locked up in that cage made me instantly think of Dr. Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And it's such perfect imagery to use in this scene because that book highlights freedom and autonomy and perseverance in the face of oppression. And that's exactly what we've seen through June. And that's exactly what we've seen with June over these 6 seasons. And now we get to hear this caged bird sing to Wharton and tell him exactly what she thinks about him. And he starts out by asking her if she knows who he is. And she says to him, I was at your wedding, actually. It was a beautiful ceremony. I think that is one of the funniest lines in this episode. I love the way she owned being at his wedding and calling it beautiful. Then he lets her out of the cage and he pulls up a chair and allows her to sit face to face with him. And at first I thought that he wanted to make her feel more vulnerable by taking her out of the cage. But it could have been a kindness, a way to ease some repentance out of her. But either way, it makes me feel like she's in Fred's study all over again. There's something about the way they were both sitting face to face and having this conversation that reminded me so much of the conversations she had with Fred in that study. Where once again, June is forced into a position where she has to figure out what it is that the man across from her wants, the way she had to learn with Fred in the study playing Scrabble, all the way up to her visit in the detention center right before she salvaged him in no man's land. We've seen so much of her maneuvering with these intimate conversations where she has to really think through every word that she says and figure out the motivations of the man across from her. And I love that it reminded me of the scene in the detention center with Fred where she was like telling him that she missed being off Red. And I always thought that was because she missed not having to play by the rules. And I think that was true because by the end of that episode, she salvages him in no man's land. I think that's great foreshadowing for what June's going to do to Wharton by the end of this episode. And it took me a couple rewatches to realize that June keeps killing Serena's husbands. And Serena could ask herself why this bitch keeps doing that. Or she could ask herself why she keeps marrying men that June wants to murder. I love that June thought Serena was the one that figured out that June was behind this whole plan, knowing that through Serena's entire wedding, she was entirely clueless. And I love that June gave her enough credit to think that she had figured that out. But then Wharton scolds June for not being more patient, telling her that Serena was working hard to make it better for the handmaids. And I love June's response so much. She goes, yeah, that's the thing about state-sanctioned rape. Patience is not an option. And I think that's why I wanted to see more of the utter carnage that he is alluding to, because we know exactly why patience is no longer an option. Because it's like, what other option did they have? A better retirement plan? Like, that wasn't going to be good enough anyway. And then he tells her that Gilead is his kingdom here on Earth. And she says, it's a horror show, run by men who are twisting his words. Frauds, all of you. It's never been about piety. It's always been about power. And it was just so good to hear her say that to his face, even if it didn't move his heart in any way. She was never able to say that to Fred's face. To see her be able to at least get that off her chest to this commander here, even while he holds her life in his hands, felt good. And he gives her that snarky reply, well, you seem really powerful now. But it's true that we've seen her really relish in the self-determination that fighting back gives her. Pre-Gilead, June was complacent, and Gilead has turned her ruthless in the pursuit of her freedom. They removed everything but the necessities, as Naomi put it. So of course June is going to relish any opportunity to take some humanity back for herself. It's not the same kind of power hunger that these commanders and the Sons of Jacob men had. She's been starved of so much under this regime that she's developed this insatiable hunger to see them suffer and brought to justice. But she doubles down and she says, this is the beginning of the end. And he tells her that Gilead shall endure. But he says he's there to show some mercy for June because Serena would want that. And she tells him that Serena would want mercy for him. In the eyes of the Lord, after the utter carnage, and I love that she used his words against him, that he caused at Jezebel's. She says, those women were trapped and their blood is on your hands. And I am so glad that she called him out for that. And I think she's trying to see where on the piety scale from like Fred to Lydia, Wharton falls. This line of persuasion would have at least moved the needle a little bit with Lydia. Fred, he would have just scoffed at it and said better never meant better for everyone. So I think she's just trying to get a feel for how much mercy and compassion Wharton has in his heart, or if she can at least find a way to persuade him using his ideology. Then she tries the Serena angle. She says, choose love, which is essentially what Wharton has been proclaiming to do this entire season. He keeps trying to prove to Serena that he's a different man than Fred. And June knows how Fred feels about love. She had a conversation with him at one point in the study in season 1 where he said, what else is there to live for besides children? And she said, love. And he scoffed at that and said, that's just lust with a good marketing campaign. So June tells Wharton to be the man that she believes you can be. And she has her hand on his arm, trying to get him to stop walking away from her. And he just looks at her with such disgust as he removes her hand from his arm. He touches her like she's actually contaminated. And he leaves. Then we cut to the next scene, and Larry is sending Naomi and Charlotte off to safety for a few days while he tries to address what is causing the riots. And Naomi has a reality check for him, and she says the others will just want revenge. And the look he gives her really says that he knows she's right. And I love that he's concerned about whether or not Naomi packed paints and crayons and paper. It was really sweet that he wanted her to have more than just the necessities, as Naomi had referred to earlier. And then he gives Naomi the book. He says, listen, this kid more than anything wants to learn, and we need to teach her. We're her parents. And that line kind of hit me hard because I appreciate what he's trying to say and do, and he's trying to impose upon Naomi that she has this duty and this responsibility to this child to parent her, which is something that I feel like Naomi needs a reminder in. And also it made me really sad when I realized that they're going to be leaving this house before the Americans can break in and get Charlotte out. Once I realized that wasn't going to go down like this in this episode, this scene already hit me as extra sad. And then the way in which Larry said goodbye to her, I'm like, oh, he's not making it out of this episode. And he knows it. There's even some foreshadowing to that before he says goodbye to Charlotte when Naomi asks what chapter he's on, and he says 9. And the look on his face when he said it kind of summed up exactly what point he was trying to make. And that made his goodbye to Charlotte even more heartbreaking because he knows this could very well be the last time that he sees this child. And it was so clear that he's developed this fatherly bond with her, but also that this child is now only going to have Naomi looking out for her. And I thought it was interesting that Naomi wiped a tear away as she was watching Lawrence say goodbye to Charlotte. And I think that Naomi knows enough about Gilead to know that she was married to one of the good ones, and that right now her marriage is very much at risk. And the last thing he says to Charlotte as the scene ends is, make some more pictures for me. Lots of colors. I think he had kind of referenced to Eleanor or about Eleanor at some point that she really loved beautiful things and really loved like colorful art or something, and that he trapped her in this bleak, desolate world. I thought it was really sweet that he's telling Charlotte to add more color into this world. And then we cut to Lawrence and Serena, and she's asking him what they're going to do about June. And she is bathed in light while Lawrence is in the darkness. And she's really advocating for June while she watches him maneuver with the other commanders. And I think she really wanted him to have a better plan for saving June, and it's really disheartening for her. To Serena, it just feels like he is doing more of the same, more of this politicking, more jockeying into position of these commanders, as we're going to see Nick do in the end. But he knows that he doesn't have another move, and he asks Serena to pray. And you know, if Lawrence is asking for prayer, then June's situation is really bleak. But I do think that he's also throwing Serena a bit of a bone here. In her darkest places, prayer is what's going to give her the strength to continue and to find some hope and to get whatever answer she's looking for. And I think that in this situation, he recognizes that this is the only power that she has in this situation. And that she would very much want to pray with him instead of telling her to pray and walking away. So Serena prays, I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. The Lord will keep me from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore. And then you get the shots of June walking up to the gallows. And before it was that familiar scene of Fenway. And now the scene is equally familiar to June because it's the town square that she's lived and operated in since she's been in Gilead. And now she's about to die here. So Wharton begins to pray. And he says the wages of sin is death. And the music intensifies as Lydia is brought out. And June is really shocked to see her. She must have thought that Lydia would be spared and that June would be blamed. And to see that they're both going to hang side by side really rocks June's world. And again, I enjoy seeing these close-ups of her face as she reacts to being executed side by side with Lydia. When you think about all the time that June has had in Gilead, to think that this would be her end has got to be such a surreal moment for her. Knowing that all those years before, Lydia was standing on that bridge right in front of them, telling her that she's got to quit the subversive nonsense and cut the shit that she learned in Lawrence's house. And here we are. And this episode's going to play out so beautifully from that episode of Mayday. But as June reels from the shock of seeing Lydia brought out, Lydia gives her a nod of solidarity and acceptance of her fate and an acceptance of the decision she made that got her there. And that was such a beautiful moment. It's like she knew that it was going to come to this, and she was willing to die for her beliefs in order to set right what she had done to these handmaids. Then it's the Econo people's turn to be shocked as they bring out all the handmaids. And I was really kind of surprised by the reaction of the crowd. And it's a good reminder that we haven't really seen a lot of the lives of the Econo people, but it's clear that after all this time under this regime, the propaganda that they've been spreading about these handmaids being both these fallen women, but also these sacred vessels, really has solidified as the perspective of the general Econo people class. So then Wharton continues, and he says, "We gather to bear witness and to condemn these apostates, these detestable cowards, who murdered God's most noble servants. Aunt Lydia, we entrusted you with their supervision, and they became killers, with no morality, no remorse. This is your fault, Aunt Lydia." God, it was so crazy to see that being thrown back in her face in this way. But he lets her atone, and she gives the most incredible atonement speech. As soon as she started to talk, I knew Lydia was going to say something really good. But the way she started out, I was like, oh God, what is this? She says, "Dear Lord, forgive me and forgive them, my precious girls. Have mercy for what they have done, for they have been prisoners of wicked, godless men." And the way in which her voice changes and she whips her head around to look Wharton right in the face as she says it, and down, that was absolute perfection. She sent chills through me with that line. Although the closed captioning makes me laugh because wicked is spelled wrong. It's spelled with a T instead of a D. And it makes me feel like they're trying to impose a Boston accent onto the closed captioning. It makes me laugh every time. Because wicked is such a stereotype of a vernacular for Boston people. So to see it spelled wrong and for the use of the word to be so biblical and so typical in the Bible, them standing in Boston like that just made me laugh. But they yank the microphone away from Lydia at that point, and they put the noose around her neck right next to Phoebe. And we get a shot of Janine watching as Lydia has the noose placed around her neck. And she looks on so resolutely and with such admiration in her. Even if this is the last thing she sees Lydia do, at least it's the last thing she sees Lydia do. And then Wharton continues. He says, "June Osborne was given the opportunity to serve Gilead and receive his divine redemption. She was shown the way of the righteous, and the light of his mercy was shone upon her. Yet she chose to poison these women with deceitfulness instead. You led them down this treacherous path. You corrupted his word. You defiled his name." And as he talks, it cuts to Luke and Rita in the crowd, and they start to move up to the front with some real urgency. And it instantly reminded me of Glen 2.0, Lily when she's bombing the Red Center, and she charges up from the handmaid's seated position to the front where Fred is speaking. And she has such a focused and determined walk as she's going up there, and I just felt like the exact same thing as Luke and Rita were making their way to the front. So when they got to the front and then they just stood there listening to June before she's about to get hung, and I'm like, wait, what's the plan? You guys ran up there. Why are we just standing there? They didn't have the grenade throwing timing down the way I was expecting, and that really, really added some intensity to the rest of June's speech because it just kept going and going. And I'm like, when are they going to start this revolt within the crowd? Because we see the knife and the gun and the grenade that Luke has. I don't know if we see the grenade until he throws it. But we know that there's something brewing in the crowd as June gets her chance to give her speech. But June wants to beg forgiveness, and Wharton lets her. And I'm kind of surprised that he let her speak after their conversation and then Lydia's last words. But whatever she ends up saying, he can spin as she's dangling in the air. Like, he's gonna have the last words regardless, so I guess he enjoys the power and control of allowing her to speak and then stringing her up regardless. But she says, "Dear Lord, I have failed you. I have failed my friends. I have failed my family." And that's when the knife comes out in the crowd. And then we get to see Luke and Janine and Moira all react to her words about letting her friends and family down. She says, I have failed the people of Gilead with my selfish and reckless ways. And then we see that Rita's got a gun. And I'm telling you, she looks so good. Resistance looks so good on Rita. This episode, last episode, she's just beautiful. But I like that June threw that in with her atonement. Because I mentioned it earlier, there's just a lot of ways in which we've debated a lot of June's actions over these seasons and whether or not they were selfish or reckless at various times. So it was really interesting to see that she's acknowledging that because it's still weighing on her mind. It's not like she was acting in this selfish and reckless way only for her own goals. It was always in response and reaction to the fascist regime in which she had to survive. But she looks up to the sky, kind of like in Serena's prayers. She says, look up to the mountains, like look up to God. June is looking up to the mountains and up to God as she continues. Please hear my prayer now. Protect your humble servants. Let them know their lives are worthy and their hopes and dreams mean something, for they are good people. And then she looks down like she's summoning the devil, and there is a real distinct tonal shift in her words as she looks up. She looks down like she's about to summon the devil, and there's a real tonal shift in the music and in her voice. And she continues, who have too long been oppressed by evil, those who have degraded your name, rise up, fight for your freedom. Don't let the bastards grind you down. And she gets her hands up onto the noose right as she's finishing that last statement. And that was all the assurance I needed that June was going to survive this. I knew it was getting very precarious, and it was very likely that she was going to get hoisted into the air on that noose. But because I saw her hands go right up to it right before, I'm like, oh, she's fine. She can hang there long enough for this revolt to like take over and get her down. But I will say she hung up there for longer than I was expecting. But right as she finishes her sentence, she gets her hands up, and then the crane hoists her into the air. And then you see Luke and Rita pull the pins on the grenade and throw. And then chaos ensues. There's explosions as Mayday rushes the stage. You see snipers taking out guardians. Then you get hand-to-hand combat in the streets with the handmaids. Then you see shots of Lydia and Janine being taken away by the guardians on the stage. And that is the last we see of them for this episode. So that is the biggest question mark I have for this final episode coming up, is what happened to Janine and Lydia. And that makes me very sad, intrigued, curious about what's going to happen to Janine, because I was so sure that we would see her get out. And now I'm so sure that she might be stuck with Lydia side by side for forever. But I would love to see Janine in the Testaments. Oh, that would be really cool. I don't know if that's going to happen. Then you get a shot of June hanging from the rope, and you can see that she's got her hands between the rope and her neck, and she's struggling to breathe. And you get a shot of Luke, and he is unhinged. And though he's not trained in combat like Ava, he is clearly fueled with this rage that's been burning in him since he got to Canada in season 1. He is as desperate for an outlet for that rage as any of the handmaids are before those persecutions and salvagings. Like, they talk about it on the show and in the book, how all this pent-up rage needs an outlet somewhere, and Luke needs an outlet for all his pent-up rage, and we're seeing him release it here, and it is really fun to watch. Then you get a shot of Moira, and she's freeing all the handmaids from their restraints, but Janine's already gone at this point. And then Rita guns down the crane operator, and it's just such a great, great shot for Rita. Like, it felt to me like she doesn't have a ton of experience firing guns, but I love the way in which she just kind of screamed, stop it, at him while she shot at him. It was perfect. Rita's perfect. It was perfect. Rita's perfect. And thankfully she gets that crane to release really quickly. Like, I would be useless in that situation. I could kill that guy and June would be dead too, because I would never have figured out how to release that machine. I would have been like running people over in the streets while June goes flying around on that rope. Thankfully, Rita knew what she was doing, and June goes flying to the ground. And the first face that she sees is Lou. And I really appreciate that he checks on her, but still has the wherewithal to at least look at the surroundings and see if there's anyone that he needs to fend off while he protects June, laying quite vulnerable on this platform. I just think that we haven't seen Luke in a lot of these situations, and I was happy that he had some good instincts. And that's when we get Ava rolling through like the trained assassin that she is. That was incredible. The way she grabbed that dead Guardian's baton and then just like rolled through the crowd taking people out. I should have known at that point, like, there is training here and she isn't who she says she is. But it went right over my head at the moment. I was just really impressed. Then we get a shot of the handmaid that was about to get killed before June gave herself up. And she is unleashing on a Guardian, just stabbing him. And then we get a shot of June looking up at the sky as the planes come in. And you hear someone in the crowd say, "Those are American planes." And then you see them bombing the skyline in the distance. And that was the first time in this episode that I had thought about that Mayday episode. Because it was so cool to see her getting those planes out and those children out and her plan successfully working. And this one was all in reverse, but it's the same idea of she was almost killed and she's laying on the ground looking up at the sky in the same way. And this time it's the planes coming in. But now she's returned to Gilead with Mayday. She's turned the handmaids into special ops. And she's seeing the plan continue to be executed as these planes come in with bombs. This Mayday rescue was the thing that she had always been waiting for. And to now see that she's bringing this rescue plan forth was really, really cool. Then we cut to the Lawrence's house, and the Americans are arriving, just like we saw in the trailer, but the only person there is Serena. And apparently Tuello and company can get past those Guardians that Wharton had mentioned posted outside with ease. And Tuello and Serena both look really surprised to see each other. And he wants to know where Lawrence is, and she just says he left. You can tell there's a little prickliness between them still. But Tuello tells her that he's taking her someplace safe. And that statue is the only thing left in the room at the end of the shot. And that's what makes me really think it's Serena raising up her hand saying, "I have the information you need." She's not willing to give it up here, but it's coming. Then we cut to Rose and Nick in the hospital room. And I hate these Gilead all-white, stark hospital rooms. They really, really gross me out. To Nick, but Rose tells Nick that she's grateful that he stayed by her side. And the underlying rest of that sentence is, "While my father tried to kill June." Just really awkward and uncomfortable, and I'm curious how much Nick knew about the June execution that was taking place while he was in the hospital. But I guess by the end of this episode, it just doesn't matter what Nick did or did not know. They do reference the rebellion and the fact that her father almost got lynched by those rebels. And then she tells Nick that he needs to end her. She goes, "The doctor said that the sedatives in the cake could have triggered these complications. She's responsible and you need to show your allegiance to Gilead, to God, and to me and to your son." And that's it right there. She plays into his daddy issues. June has rejected him, and he has every opportunity here to set himself and his son up in this world. He was a nobody before Sons of Jacob and Gilead took over, and now his son will be somebody under this regime, as long as Nick can continue to play his cards right, and that's what's going to get him on the plane by the end of this episode. And the final image is of this happy Gilead faithful family. And it's gross. I do like the shot of Nick looking over his shoulder here, because it feels very similar to when he's about to board the plane. It makes me think that he wasn't actually looking towards June or feeling June's presence in like the literal sense, like he thought she was around the corner, but more of just like he's finally making a decision to prop himself up in Gilead as opposed to just survive. And I feel like that's just him looking over his shoulder like anyone at all is watching him. Not that June is so much like watching from the corner, but just that he's acknowledging her presence in his mind while he makes this decision. These are actions she'll eventually see and know that he's making. And that look over the shoulder just feels like that hesitation and that second guessing of his own decisions. Then we cut to the new Mayday headquarters, and June is up and moving through triage, and Rita sees her and she tells her that she needs rest, and June says she'll rest later. And she's clearly on a mission for something. She does mention Moira. She asks about Moira, but she doesn't ask about Janine, and I'm just dying to know what happened to Janine and why June didn't ask about her. But June finds Luke, and all she says is, "Where's Tuello?" Because she wants to know what's next. So she finds him, and she finds out that Ava is CIA. top of her class. And she updates June on what's going on. They have a small foothold in Boston, but they still need to kill the rest of the extremist commanders. They're just a couple of bombs away from losing their foothold. Tuello tells June that they can't find Lawrence, and June wants to know if they have any other assets, and that's when she finds out that Serena is right across the street. So June continues her determined walk right across the street and into that church. And Serena is so surprised to see her. And she's shocked that June thinks that she would want her dead. But Serena admits that what happened at her wedding was trivial compared to what June did to all those commanders. And June says they got what they deserved. And then Serena, just like knee-jerk reaction, says it's not for you to decide. And that made me want to strangle her, because June doesn't have the information to respond appropriately. June just says she doesn't have time to get into it with Serena, and they've had this argument too many times over. We know that Serena absolutely doubled down on this same idea in the movie theater with Fred when they find out that the Sons of Jacob plans to overthrow the government is a go. And she's the one that reassures Fred in that moment and says, no, this is what needs to happen. So for Serena to act like it's not June, so for Serena now to say it's not up for June to decide when the Sons of Jacob absolutely decided, and Serena said they should, and they did. But June just tries to tell her, like, look, yeah, I know you weren't making the decisions in the room with these commanders because you were shut out of it, but you would have had you had the opportunity. But they don't have time to argue about this. So June tells her, I need to know where those surviving commanders are meeting. And Serena doesn't give her the information at first, and June gets really frustrated with her. She starts to tell her that all of those hopes and dreams of reform were just talk. And Serena says, Gilead will send more and more men just like them. And June doubles down and says, then we will keep fighting. We won't give up. And Serena looks at her and she says, you're asking me to put a target on my husband's back. And June responds, he's a tyrant, Serena, and you know that. And she does know that. A couple hours ago, she was fleeing his home. And June asks her, is this the father that you want for your son? Rose does, but Serena has doubt. And June continues, God blessed us with these beautiful and healthy children. He trusts us to keep them safe and to raise them in a world of love. And with that, Serena relents. But not before June just barely gives up on her and says, forget it, it's a dead end of a street. And then Serena tells her they're flying to DC and they're leaving New Bedford at 7. And it seems like this caged bird is singing too. June thanks her, and Serena looks up like she's hoping that she's back on God's path after this. And Serena owed June very specifically in season 3 after setting up that meeting with baby Nicole Hawley in Canada by calling Luke, which was a really big fucking ask of Serena for her at that point. And June said she would only do it if Serena understood that she owed her. I will accept that this is the payoff of Serena owing June for that situation. And it was worth the wait. Then we cut to the next scene where Larry is being brought into Mayday. And he acts very indignant and surly when the soldiers are there. But as soon as they leave, he instantly softens and he goes and checks on June. And I love that he's smart enough to keep the facade up even in front of these American soldiers. And I especially love that once he felt safe to do so, he was really concerned about June. There was no snark in his voice as he talked to her. He said, I heard you had quite a day. She goes, sore throat, I'll survive. A great line. I love that the tables turned in this situation, and it's Larry that brings the concern. We know that emotion is not necessarily his strong suit. He really likes to mask any feelings he has with a joke. And I love that it's June that has the joke in response for him. I hope anything else we see of June is always infused with a Larry snark that's perceptible, because we've seen so much of the way in which he has taught her to fight in her now. So a little bit of his levity would be nice too. He updates June and Tuello and says that he's been benched, and Reynolds and Calhoun and Wharton are all alive and seeking vengeance. He says that Wharton is all fire and brimstone, and there's a new reign of terror as they claim safety for the righteous people of Gilead. And then June tells him that she knows about the plans thanks to Serena. She says, she's one of us now. And Lord says, wonders never cease. And now he's watched Serena, of all people, choose resistance and Mayday. So how can he not? Tuello presents the bomb with the altitude trigger, and he says all you have to do is board the plane and get off before they get on. And I love Larry's response so much. He says, I'm sorry, when you said you just now, I thought you were looking at me. And Tuello reminds him, you're a high commander, you have access. And he goes, I'm an economist, not James Bond. And that's when Tuello acknowledges that he knows it's out of his comfort zone. And Larry gets that great line of, have you met me? My comfort zone is minuscule. But Tuello reminds him that if the plane takes off, they win for sure. He has to go now. And he goes to the window and he's really pondering this mission that's been presented to him. But June offers to go with him. And he says, you can't do that. You're safe now. She says, no one is safe. Not when those men are alive. Let's see this through together. And I think the only reason that she's offering to go with him here to see this through is because she knows how easily he could back out. And she really needs to go with him so that she can see it through. She knows that his comfort zone is minuscule. If you go back and watch Mayday, you'll see it. He's scared through the whole episode. He's trying to pull the plug on the plan through the whole episode. This isn't his forte. But all that time in his house with her subversive nonsense, she really has learned a lot from him. He taught her to put her emotion aside and let logic dictate. And then she taught him how to let his emotions fuel this ruthless pursuit, even when logic tells you otherwise. He showed her tactical maneuvers and she showed him courage. They got Angel's flight out together and now they need to bring Satan's flight down. And Larry knows that when June needs something to happen, she's going to make sure it happens. And she needs this bomb on this plane. So honestly, what other choice does he have? He knows she's relentless. So June rides with him for moral support and possibly with a gun ready to persuade him otherwise if he decides to back out. They arrive at the airport hangar and they both get out and see each other face to face. And she says, courage looks good on you, Joseph. And that line was really ominous to me because when Tuello first presented the bomb, I thought this was going to be a suicide mission all along. So when that wasn't initially the plan, instantly I knew that at some point something's going to go wrong and Larry's going to have to make that choice to turn this into a suicide mission or abort the plan. And so June telling him that courage looks good on him moments before he's going to need that courage was very ominous to me. And I loved his response. He says, well, I learned from the best. And she really did teach him that. And we see how it goes wrong pretty instantly as the other commanders arrive right after they do. And they're ready for vengeance. They want to know why he's there, and he falters. If they would have just shut up, he would have revealed himself as not having a response to even why he's there. You could see him stumbling. For as witty as he is, he's not good at thinking on his feet in the situation we're seeing. But they don't perceive his stammering as anything other than him trying to find some footing to pitch a new political plan. And somebody says he wants us to make nice with the Americans. And someone else goes, no, he wants us to expand New Bethlehem because that worked out so well. So they say, stay here, Lawrence, watch us burn this shit place to the ground. They basically said, stay here and die. I guess it's pretty clear how they feel about him. But Wharton's the only one that's happy to see him joining. He says they need to have a united front in D.C. And he goes, are you joining us, Commander? And so he starts to get on the plane and he can see that Larry's a little hesitant. And he asks him, are you joining us, Commander? And he knows what he has to do. I kept thinking there was a way for him to get on, leave the bomb, and then just find a reason to get off. But the more I thought about it, the more there's only one way to ensure that this plan goes down. And it's now for him to get on this plane with this bomb. If he gets off and it alerts suspicion at all that he has left his suitcase behind and they discover the bomb, now the plan is ruined and he's dead. If he's going to be dead either way, the last thing he can do before he goes out is help see this plan through. We just know that that's all he wants to do is see reform through in any way and undo all the horrors that he set into place to begin with. He knows what he has to do. The final look to June before he boards is absolutely heartbreaking. And then Bradley Whitford really twists the knife in when he puts his fist to his heart, and you can feel the weight of his sacrifice all over June's face. You need that close-up of June seeing the decision that he's making. And after everything they've been through, that look and that gesture and her bearing witness to him and the sacrifice, it was just so beautiful. June's face perfectly expresses how noble and devastating the finality of his actions are as he boards that plane. And then once he steps into the aircraft, June stands up. And it's either out of an instinctual sign of respect or this instinctual urge to find a way to help him. But I thought it was really interesting that she stands. Like, there's something she needs to do, but she's stuck. She has to stay in that hiding place. Are we calling where she's standing in relation to the car a hiding place? I don't know. It's hard to tell from perspective, but the entire time she's watching this, I am like, everyone can see you, June. Get in the car. Can you get in the car? Can't you still watch this in the car? She was stressing me out standing up like that. But I thought it was really beautiful and poignant that she stands as soon as he gets into this plane. But she's only standing for a moment before another car arrives and forces her back into hiding, a term I use loosely. But Nick arrives. And in that moment, I was so sure that June was going to stop him. And in hindsight, I would have been so irritated by that. Lawrence taught her to be logical, and logic is showing her where Nick's allegiance is right now. It lies on this plane with these extremist commanders, and he's showing up saying he's one of them. And all she can do is stand back and watch him make his final fatal mistake. And that is devastating to watch play out on her face. I was completely breathless by the end of the scene. But I do really appreciate the restraint that June had to allow Nick to make his own choice instead of trying to save him. And he looks towards her as he pauses at the threshold of the plane. He has a choice to turn back, but he steps up. And as he steps up, the light washes over him. And he pauses one more time just before he steps into the darkness within. And that last line of Offred's story in the book fits perfect with the shot of Nick here. Except Nick's character is no longer shrouded in this mystery that he was throughout the book and the series. And neither is the imagery. The line in the book leaves it unclear as to what Offred's van trip will mean, escape or death. But with this shot with Nick, it's clear he's stepping out of the light and into the darkness within, which is a plane full of wicked, godless men who deserve what's coming to them. And then you get a shot of June, and she is breathless as she watches Nick make this choice. And I could feel that in my lungs. I think that was the first time I realized that I wasn't breathing either. Then you see Lawrence get surprised that Nick has just boarded the plane. And Nick looks surprised that Lawrence is on the plane. But Nick continues on to Wharton, eager to make Daddy proud. And there's a shot of Lawrence looking out the window, probably towards June, realizing that she just watched Nick get on this plane and didn't stop him. And so I kept thinking when Nick got on that it was Lawrence that was going to clue him in and tell him to get off. But as I'm watching him look out that window, I'm like, if June didn't stop him, why does Lawrence think that he should? And then I remembered that Lawrence flat out told June that she trusted Nick too much and that he wouldn't trust Nick with important information, and that he was very careful about what information he gave to Nick. So with this most important information, why would you give it to Nick at all? Like, he would be the ultimate hero. If he knew what was going on and he uses it to save these commanders and save this flight, he'd be a hero. He could entirely change his status within the winners as he sees them. So it's very smart and logical for Lawrence to not tell Nick, especially considering June did. Nick made his own choice to get on that plane, and he's about to face the consequences of it. Nick goes over to Wharton, and he's introduced to the rest of these commanders as the future of Gilead, my son and grandsons. And then he goes and sits next to Larry. And then he has that really gross line about deciding to join the winners. And to me, it feels like he has just decided to choose the winning side, the side that's going to make him a winner, that's going to give him security and safety and power and privilege within this world, something he hadn't had before. But he's going to have to double down into this commander world right now like he's doing. And you can tell that it's still uncomfortable on him. I don't think that this was like Nick running around and running his mouth off with these commanders at all times like this. I just think that right now he has to play this new role of this important commander. Now that there's 37 commanders dead, like, there's a lot of room for him to gain power within the situation. And I think what we're seeing in Nick's last scenes is him uncomfortably trying to navigate this new world. And you know what was also really gross about this scene? So obviously it's like this private plane and there's all this crystal decanters and it's just opulent and luxurious in an obnoxious way, right? But these commanders want vengeance for this attack that left 37 commanders dead. But they are not in mourning. There's no grieving happening amongst these men. Somebody says something about cigars. Like, they're going to have scotch and they're going to smoke cigars and drink scotch on this private plane on the way to DC. There's something that rings so true about the most powerful people in our government doing exactly this. And it's like they're celebrating their survival and the fact that they're going to get to bomb the shit out of Boston in retaliation. But nowhere at any point on this plane is there anyone that's upset about the dead commanders, specifically grieving them at all. Just another good reminder of exactly the wicked, godless men that are on this plane that Nick has just aligned himself with. I love Larry's line after Nick says the thing about deciding to join the winners. And Larry says, you know how it works. You do what you need to survive. And that's such a great line considering he's doing the exact opposite. Every time I rewatch it, I think that line is such an underrated, great line in an episode where there's so many incredible interactions. And Nick says, what about all your plans? And he says it in such a douchey way. It kind of comes off like he's gloating that Lawrence's plans have all been ruined. I think he's trying to find some camaraderie in the fact that, like, Nick is operating underneath a new playbook at this point, and I think he thinks that Lawrence is too. But Lawrence's response is great. He says, someone better than I will have to see it through. And then you hear the pilot tell the commanders to prepare for takeoff, and you get a shot of June watching the wheels start to move. And her reaction is so incredibly perfect. The shock of what she just had to silently witness washes over her completely, and she gasps. And then they cut back into the plane, and that's when Nick asks if June is okay. And Larry responds with another great line, and he says, you can't keep a good woman down. Ironic considering they tried to hang her up. Then the music that comes in is so hauntingly beautiful. As Nick says to Lawrence, she did tell me to give this up. She did tell me. Many times. And I love that Lawrence's last line in this show is, you should have listened to her. And this final shot inside this plane is so devastatingly beautiful. And the final shot inside this plane is so beautiful and so haunting. First of all, the plane feels very small and tight and enclosed like a tomb full of all these dead commanders. And then you've got these two characters sitting side by side for two very different reasons, and yet they're gonna have the same fate. And I don't get any joy out of seeing Nick get blown to smithereens, but I can absolutely see how he has made this decisions through this series to get him to this point. And in this final episode, he doubled down on these decisions that he wasn't going to leave Gilead. He wasn't going to help Mayday. He wasn't going to try to get out. He doesn't want to get his son out. He only ever wanted to get June out and to keep her safe. And even with everything that he saw June go through within Gilead, we've never seen him show concern for the oppression of anyone else within this system. But on one side, you've got Lawrence, who is the self-proclaimed architect of Gilead. And this world and this regime in which he built, or at least helped build, and imagined and envisioned and empowered these sons of Jacob to enact this plan that he had. So you've got Lawrence, like, day one, he's owning that he built this regime. Then you've got Nick, who was recruited into this regime at a point in his life where he was young and vulnerable. And we've talked about what this regime does to these women in removing their humanity and oppressing them. But throughout this whole series, we've also seen what this regime has done to men, specifically Nick, who were young and easily impressionable. And yet, over the years within the system, despite seeing its horrors, will have to survive in a way in which he's going to double down and get on this plane and become one of these commanders. And at the end of the day in Gilead, if you're a commander, then you're working for Gilead, unless you're Lawrence or somebody like Lawrence who's actively trying to bring it down and undermine it from within or blow it up from within, as we see in this episode. There's just so much that we can extract from this one final shot, given how much we've seen through these series of these two men. So it's just so fascinating. I can't wait to have this completed series so it can like really sink my teeth into things, into more of that, where we can go back and watch the recruitment of Nick and how he slowly shifted into not only a commander, but a commander who's seeking power and climbing that ladder from within. Like I said it a couple episodes before, like Nick wasn't initially trying to climb the Gilead ladder. He was just trying to survive, sure. And it was Fred that thrust him up that ladder in order to get him away from June and to send him off to war. So, yes, I agree that Nick didn't initially try to climb that ladder. But here, in this episode, in this scene, he's on this plane to climb this ladder. And unfortunately for him, it's an altitude-triggered bomb. And I love the symbolism of this bomb because the plane takes off. So the next shot is of the plane taking off and June watching. As the plane is getting higher and higher in the sky, I'm just waiting for it to explode. And that's such a perfect metaphor for these commanders and the ladder that they're going to climb. The higher they're going to go, the more dangerous it is for them. And literally in this flight, the higher they go, the closer to death they become. And then I love the shot of the plane climbing through the air, but then it cuts to June and you're watching June watch the plane, and then you see the explosion from the light on her face. And her expression is just complete awe of what just unfolded. She set a trap for the worst commanders in Boston, and Nick walked right into it. And now he's just smoldering ash in the sky. All thanks to Lawrence, you have these two men that mean so much to June. And it's so cool to watch their deaths play out on her face like this. It was just beautiful. And it was not lost on me that they have referred to Nick's smoldering looks at least once. I think Larry says it at least once. He refers to his smoldering gaze. And every time I watch this scene, I just keep thinking, smoldering ashes. That's an episode. An absolutely incredible episode. I am in love with this episode. I just want to go watch it again. It makes me so excited for how they're going to finish out this series. I loved it. I love that we go off book. We don't make any massive changes to the Testaments by killing off Nick. I'm more curious about the bigger changes. I'm more curious about the bigger changes and what they might be doing with the Holly Nicole character. And I don't know. There's a lot of Testaments questions. But I absolutely love that they took some book canon of something that I hadn't even considered. Like I just kept thinking, well, surely Nick and Luke will both survive because in the Testaments it says that they do. And so I just wasn't really considering either of them dying. And I love that they threw that curveball in because it just fits so perfectly with this episode and with the series and with his character and with the arc that we've seen from the beginning. And I love that we're going to get to kind of sink our teeth into exactly this, what it looks like when a young man is recruited into a Sons of Jacob regime and then violently overthrows the government. I just feel like I know so many Nicks in my life that would get into that plane in this moment. Then that's a really interesting conversation to have. And that's why I love this show. And that's why we started a podcast to begin with, because there are so many interesting conversations that stem off of this show. And this one is absolutely like chef's kiss. Perfect. There's just so much here. This will be an episode that I look forward to rewatching every time I rewatch this series. Like it's just kind of what the entire series was building towards, and it's just making me very excited for this final episode. So I'm going to leave it here for now. I don't really have any guesses. I did do a prediction video. It's mostly wrong given this episode. That's it. I got no other further guesses. I'm really curious to see about Janine and Lydia and what's going to happen with them, and then how they end the series. But I just have the ultimate faith that it's going to be incredible, and I just can't wait to talk about it. And then we'll finally have a completed series to compare against the book and all the ways in which the showrunners took this book and turned it into a series, and how they're going to do it again with the Testaments. So I'm just still riding high over this episode. It was just that incredible. Eric Tuchman, Elizabeth Moss, everybody involved, well done. It was perfect. And just makes me so happy as someone who's watched this show so closely for all these seasons. This is just such an incredible penultimate episode of a series. So the bar is high for next week, and I can't wait. I will do a live again. Same thing, 15 minutes after the episode, I'll jump on and give first reaction and start talking. I have a better idea of what I'm doing. Thank you so much for everybody that showed up to the last one. And this episode just entirely blew my mind in so many ways that I didn't have a whole lot of coherent thoughts. So thank you for showing up and listening anyway. I will try to have a better idea of what I'm doing with the next one, of like at least having 5 points to talk about. There were so many things, like once I got off, I was like, oh, I didn't talk about any of this stuff. So I will do a better job of reacting next week. And so I'll try to come in with like several major points, like the biggest points from the episode, and then we'll get into the comments, and I'll try to read. I'm a slow reader, and obviously my reading comprehension could have been better in that last one. Yeah, we'll do it all again, and I'll try better. But I really appreciate everyone that came and contributed to the conversation, because it was a really nice way to have a jumping off point before I got into taking my notes for this episode, because I felt like in some way we had already kind of hashed out a couple things. So thanks for hashing that out with me right after the episode, and we will do it all again for the finale.